Propulsion Lab. I'm Brian Demers, and I'm here with Brian Fox today. We're going to talk about how security affects productivity, or maybe it doesn't have to. Brian is the CTO of Sonatype, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So Brian Fox, co-founder, CTO at Sonatype. Let's see. We can go way back. Apache Maven guy for a long time. A member of the Apache Software Foundation. I'm also currently a governing board member at the OpenSSF, and I've been spending a lot of time lately, working on the policy side of things through the OpenSSF and CISA and ONCD and the European Commission, and as you might not be surprised, they're highly interested in security and open source these days. So that's been keeping me busy.
There's a lot of acronyms and letters in there.
Yeah, there were.
Yeah, that's good.
You can look them up.
Yeah.
There's this thing called the internet.
Whoever's watching this can type it out, right? That's good. Everyone knows those are all security related. They're like, they're in that bucket of
CISA,
security.
the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Administration.
Do you remember them all?
Yeah, and Office of the National Cyber Director.
Oh, we don't have to go through them.
Okay.
You can.
I can.
Oh, that's good. So I've known Brian forever at this point, I think.
Yep.
You were actually one of my first bosses.
Yeah, since you were like a little kid.
Yeah, I was.
Neither of us had white hair back then.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot different nowadays. So like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about productivity and security. I always get this feeling there's a little bit of contention there, especially on the policy side of things.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe you can start off by telling us why that may not be a bad thing, and maybe there's some ways that it doesn't need to be in the way.
Yeah, so I think in 2024, I think most people, after Log4Shell and SolarWinds and some of the more recent attacks, I think most people probably could come to accept that going a little bit slower, being a little bit more focused on security is probably worthwhile, right? I think that wouldn't be as controversial now as it would have been 10 years ago. But actually, some of the studies we've done shows that's not even the case. It was a couple years ago, in our annual State of the Software Supply Chain report, we did a study, and we kind of looked at a bunch of different companies, and we put them into different cohorts. And so there's the set of companies that focus on security above all else, right? And then there's another set that are like, screw security, we're going as fast as we can. And so if I said, you probably want to be on the security side, most people would be like, yeah, that seems reasonable. What we actually found, though, was that companies that focused on managing the supply chain and solving for both of these problems were both faster than those that only cared about going fast and more secure than the people who only cared about security. Now that seems like that doesn't add up, right? But stop and think about it for a minute. If you're only in a company that says we're going to go slow and methodical and we're going to check everything and we're going to be super thorough because security is above else, your build systems, your CI systems, all these kinds of things are probably pretty slow. So when something bad happens, it's going to take you a long time to go through the process and actually cut a release and move forward, right? Now, on the other side, if you're saying we only care about going fast, those folks don't get a pass. They still had to fix Log4j or whatever vulnerability of the week it happens to be. They still have to deal with it, but what it means is they haven't built their systems in a way to be able to deal with that. So when you optimize for only one or the other, when something happens, it totally screws up your rhythm. When you've stepped back and you put guardrails in place for the developers and systems in place, then these things become a non-issue. So actually, if you solve for both, we've found that you're again, more security and faster, and on average, have between 10 and 30% more productivity available to actually build the business logic that matters.
Okay, so that's wild. So you're both following best practices, your builds are faster, you're able to ship code faster, all doing them better than if you were focused on either one individually.
That's right.
That's crazy. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah.
I was guessing you were saying the people who are moving faster or at least able to update faster. But
when I saw those results, I was like, that's got to be wrong. I don't believe that. You're doing the math wrong. And I looked into it myself, and it came away like, no, actually, this makes sense when you really break it down.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how that's the case because you have to have your tools in place so you can move fast,
Yeah.
right? But if those tools are in place, it's also easy to update your dependencies or
That's right.
whatever your infrastructure is and get a release out. So that's fast too, which helps feed into the security side of things and getting things done.
That's right. I mean, we saw it very. The graphs were very pronounced in the Log4j scenario that we, and again, we published this in our annual State of the Software Supply Chain report. Last year we had it specifically, but we showed examples of organizations that had already had these tooling in place. When Log4Shell came out, they remediated 80% of their 4,000 plus portfolio of applications in like 4 days. Right? And they got to 100% inside of a week. Why is that? It's because they already had the systems in place. So when Log4Shell came out and our researchers put it into the system, their developers immediately knew, I have this problem, here's how I fix it. I know that it affects me because I'm being told about it in the context of my application. It's not just like an email to the whole company saying, everybody update. It's very targeted and very precise. And so they just fixed it. It was basically a non-event for these types of companies. Conversely, you talk to companies who spent 6 months just trying to figure out, do we use Log4j anywhere? Do we have the vulnerable versions before they can even start to fix it, right? So that's a perfect example of like when these things are done right, it was a non-issue. They moved on, continued building their business logic instead of having like a year-long process to eradicate Log4j.
Yeah, I think I heard a similar statistic on Heartbleed, whatever. That was 100 years ago at this point. But Cisco...
I think I saw a tweet literally yesterday that it was 10 years ago.
Was it really?
10 years ago yesterday.
But I forget the vulnerability that came out. Maybe it was the old the struts issue, whatever it was.
Yeah.
There was some old vulnerability that it took Cisco months and months to even just figure out what was affected. Mm-hmm. And then, a few years later at Heartbleed, forever ago at this point.
Yeah, I think
but it only took
struts.
them like a week, I think, to get everything on premise updated.
Right.
Which shows you, how much better you can be now. And this is 10 years ago, so I would imagine now better tools are in place.
That's right.
There's really no excuse anymore.
That's right. Yeah, and a lot of the stuff that we've been focused on lately is trying to even make that even easier. When you start taking into account things like API compatibility, breaking changes, runtime changes, these things are all knowable with today's technology. Can you take all that together and can you automatically create pull requests so that these things can get automatically suggested updates? I mean, we've seen tools like Dependabot and some of these other things come out, but everybody knows they're very noisy because they're basically just saying update to the latest, update to the latest, and at some point that's going to break things. But if you go a little bit more methodical and you look at some of the data behind it, you can actually make even better, more precise updates, and that's a lot what we've been focused on.
In an all automated fashion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the big problems that I see is that, especially in the open source world, is a vulnerability is released and companies are like, we have to update because there was a CVE, regardless if we're using it right now, the dependency is in our tree and it has to be updated. So full stop, you have to fix this issue. Well, what if it doesn't affect you?
Right.
So I guess that's the problem you're solving.
It is, and that's the problem we've always been trying to solve by providing precise data, precise policy, contextual policy. We're only alerting the developers when there's a problem in their application, right? And so we've always been about that. There's two. I want to play both sides of what you just said, actually. For the last 2 years, we've done a study of the vulnerable components being downloaded from Maven Central. And when those components are being downloaded, 96% of the time, there was already a fix available. Right? So that means the problem is not on the open source maintainers not doing a good job of updating. I mean, even Log4j, they fixed this because it was irresponsibly disclosed over Thanksgiving weekend, and they still fixed it like on Monday morning, right?
Yep.
And so the problem wasn't that they didn't update. As we sit here today, the last 7-day average of Log4j downloads, you want to take a guess what the percentage is of the vulnerable ones?
I know a year ago it was something like 30% or something, right?
33%.
It's still today. 30%.
Still today, it's 33%.
That's
right?
wild. That's unacceptable, really.
It is unacceptable. It's really terrible. And so that kind of shines a light on the fact that the consuming organizations aren't, more often than not even doing the thing that you asked. Or if they are doing that, the developers are just ignoring it, right? Because the empirical data is it's not working. And so we're looking at ways to actually change that behavior as well. So that's part of the problem. And then, of course, like you said, when the vulnerability zero is the other angle that I want to play. Josh Bressers from Anchor wrote a blog about this last year or so, titled Vulnerability Zero. We've seen this because we provide free data services through OSS Index, right? And so a lot of tools are out there pulling the data down, providing vulnerability lists, and then people freak out when they find something that has a vulnerability. And so there's like this pressure from organizations that just because there's a vulnerability, I must stop the world and fix everything, which is also not the right answer. In many cases, they're not applicable, but they're not understanding the nuance between it. And so if you push on that too hard, now you have an incentive for people to not discover the vulnerabilities, right? To hide them, not do the right thing about it. And so that approach of like everybody must update this thing every single time also, over-rotated on the wrong side. The right answer is somewhere in between.
Yeah, I like that. I like, the idea of letting tools, help you with these things to make you more productive, right?
Right.
Cool. All right. So if I was a developer starting out today and I'm overwhelmed by all of this security stuff, what do I do first? Like, do I learn about things? Do I ignore it? Do I put my head in the sand? What do I do?
After you put your head in your sand and rock back and forth for a while, I think you need to start looking for approaches to have better understanding of what's actually inside your software, all the way down the transitive hole. That's the other part. Many organizations just stop at the direct dependencies, right? So understanding the dependencies of your dependencies, turtles all the way down, as they say, is the first step. And then thinking about, tooling that can help you. Of course, Sonatype, that's what we do, right? We've been doing that for a long time, partially because as we run the Maven Central repository, way back in the day, I mean, you were there, you remember,
yep.
we observed that like the most popular version of Bouncy Castle, a white clean room crypto library, was the level 10 vulnerable thing that had been fixed 2 years ago. And that led us to scratching our heads like, why is that, right? So we had early insight into this consumer problem that led to trying to build these solutions.
All right, so I know the answer to this. I know you've probably answered this 1,000 times, but why does Central let you download vulnerable packages?
You had to go there, didn't you?
I don't know. There's people on here that probably haven't heard the answer before.
I get this question a lot.
You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but
no, but I think
TLDR.
I think it's important. So historically, one of the things about Maven and Maven Central is that the stability is really important, right? So we all remember what happened when NPM let the shift left? No, not shift left. The left pad guy. Yep. In protest, he deleted his package and he broke builds worldwide because he just took it down, right? So we prioritize stability over the ability to just change things. But more often than not, people tend to think about like these vulnerable components like they are, let's use a supermarket. People are like, you can't sell, salmonella tainted lettuce in the supermarket knowingly. So why do you let these components exist? And that's the mental model most people think. But in most vulnerabilities, like we were just talking about, they are not usually globally applicable. So in that instance, it's more like peanuts. Peanuts and peanut dust can kill a lot of people. You could still go into a grocery store and buy peanuts. Why? Because the context is there. But we also know that we label them correctly so that it's supposed to be known. The big allergens are supposed to be called out. So for somebody who does have that sensitivity, they can discover, I should avoid this type of thing, right? And so that's kind of the better mental model to have in mind, that just because something has a vulnerability doesn't mean we should disappear it from the internet. Right, that often will cause more harm than good. Now, when you're talking about intentionally malicious components, that's a totally different thing. There's no reason for them to exist. Those things do get removed. In Maven Central, there's only been, one instance so far. I think it was a probing test a couple years ago, for reasons that we don't have time to get into right now. But it happens a lot in NPM and other repos where there are malicious components. Those things get taken away. That is the salmonella in the lettuce kind of situation.
I love this mental model. The peanuts, the labels, everything's there, especially on Maven Central. Everything's labeled. Has there really only been one malicious package on Maven Central? That's a pretty good record given how many packages are there.
Oh, jeez, I don't even know. Millions?
More than 3.
Millions, more than 3, more than 3, yes.
Wow, millions of packages. All right, so we talked a little bit about what developers should do. So, I don't know, what do you want to talk about? Where do you want to send folks after they've watched this?
Go to sonatype.com. take a look at our product suite. We just launched a developer-focused set of tools. There's a 30-day free trial, so take a look at that. And if you're interested in the stats I was talking about, sonatype.com/SSCR for State of the Software Supply Chain Report.
Oh, excellent.
This year in October, we'll be launching the latest one. That's a long ways away, but we're already working on it. It's the 10-year anniversary. We've been doing it 10 years now. And so there's going to be a lot of extra look back on some of these things that I was talking about that we haven't analyzed in a couple years to kind of refresh them and sort of top post them, if you will, because they're still relevant.
Awesome. Well, it's September.
October.
October. Same thing.
Yeah. Close enough.
It's the fall.
That's right.
It's it's good. I love looking through those things, especially the look backs, right? Because it's both an incredibly long period of time, 10 years in the tech world, but at the same time, what I just brought up Heartbleed, right? Which doesn't feel like it's been that long ago.
And unfortunately, some things aren't changing fast enough, like the consumption patterns that I talked about. The last 2 years, it was 96% of those downloads were known to be vulnerable. So we didn't make a good change. We haven't moved fast enough as an industry. That's why legislators are getting involved. And that's like a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic, right? SBOMs, and it's something that I know in the open source world we're trying to figure out. Do we need to care? We probably should care, but
you're going to be required to care.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That's not going to be an option.
And then it's going to be, if the U.S. cares, right? That's one thing. Do they care in other countries? Anyway, that's a whole other topic. We don't.
Who's going to define the standard? Are we going to have competing standards, different levels?
Yeah. Is there going to be complexity, like overlap between them?
There will be.
Yeah.
Yes, it will be.
So there's going to be some Uber set that we'll have to deal with.
That's right.
It's going to be a mess.
That's right.
But we don't have to worry about that right now.
Sure, we can.
Or at least in this 15 minutes.
In this 15 minutes, we don't have to worry about it.
All right. So, Brian, I appreciate you being here. So thanks for taking the time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
You too.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.